So, and I believe everyone are very ready. How many are still coming? So we still have 9. Yeah, okay. So, but I believe we can already start. So for the next hour, I will be with you to talk more about data collection and analysis. Okay, so I guess it is about timely. So we are going to start right now. Okay, so our topic for this morning will be about data collection and analysis. So for this topic, you are going to be learning the following objectives. So these are the objectives that we should be meeting or we should be, following for this morning. So first we have to determine the appropriate data collection techniques to be used for a given problem. Next is to construct correct data collection procedures. Third, identify data analysis techniques used in research. And the last one is to apply appropriate data analysis technique in a given problem. So I was thinking that you already have your own working title right now, and perhaps you also have the idea of your statement of the problem, your research questions already, and perhaps with the research questions that you already have the idea on how you would gather your data as well. So that is why for this session will guide you on the ways in how you appropriately gather your data. Okay. So there are a lot of ways in how we could gather data. First of which is through survey. So I guess this is very familiar to you. You could use survey like survey questionnaire. You could ask yes or no questions. You could have a Likert scale questionnaire and many others. Another way of collecting data is through interview, especially if you are having qualitative studies or research, then you would go for interviewing your participants. Next method would be discussion. You could have focus group discussion, just like what is shown in the picture right there. Another is through observation. So there are times that you would need to verify the data that you gather in the field through observation. So you want to see yourself what is really happening in the locale or in the environment that you are studying. So you would do that through observation. Next is by collection. So that could be, you could do collecting some information through data mining and many other ways at how you could collect a lot of data. Now, in data collection, there are a lot of procedures that you are going to follow. So these are the data collection procedures that you would do before actually collecting data. So first is you develop your data collection instrument and materials. Okay, so let me just go back to what I said earlier, that when you are going to have your instrument, it must be relevant and patterned to your statement of the problem and also your subqueries. It is very important that you could establish that relevance between your statement of the problem and your subqueries and also your instrument. Otherwise, if your instrument is not related to your subqueries, then you wouldn't get the right answer to your question. So that is why this is the very basic thing that you should do. When you have the statement of the problem and you have your subqueries already, upon crafting your instrument, you should put your subqueries side by side your instrument. Like for example, for question number 1, what would be my specific questions that I would put in my instrument that will give answer to this first subquery? So it should be like that. Next is you seek permission from the authorities. Of course, you should not just barge in directly and gather data yourself. You have to seek permission. That is why part of the process that you should be undergoing is writing a letter to, of course, it's a good idea that you are going to you're going to conduct this particular research, then of course you have to ask permission to the school head that these teachers would be your participants or will be your respondents, or these particular set of students are your participants or your respondents, like that. Next is you select and screen the population using appropriate sampling techniques. There are a lot of sampling techniques. I believe you have had a session about it already. So you could do simple random sampling, you could do stratified random sampling, you could have cluster sampling, and so on. Okay, so you have to choose the best sampling technique that you will use in data collection. Next is you train the raters, observers, assistants, and other research personnel. So if you couldn't do it yourself or all by yourself, make sure that you train your co-rater, your co-observer, so that you have the same direction and you would be getting the same data. Because of course, if you are not going to train the other rater or the other observer, you might be looking at the same thing at a different perspective. And that way, you are not getting the same idea or the same data that you want to get from your research. Next, obtain informed consent from the participants. Do not just go directly asking your participant to answer your question. Of course, so part of ethical consideration is to inform or to get an informed consent from your participants. And it has to be explained to them because others would prefer to keep themselves become anonymous upon responding. So that is why you have to respect their privacy as well. Next is you pilot test the instrument. So before actually using your instrument in the field, before actually using it for gathering your data, you have to pilot test your instrument. Now, why do you need to pilot test the instrument? So you have to pilot test your instrument so that you could check whether that instrument is the best instrument that will give you the best answer or the answer that you really seek in your research. Okay, so I guess we are clear on that part already. So do we have questions from our participants? Are you still okay there? It's so hard to talk if no one is responding, right? Okay, anyway, we are now going to proceed to the next. So these are the data collection procedures during. Okay, so this is now the actual data collection. So what are you going to do? So of course, first you have produced all your instruments already. For example, if they are survey questionnaires, if you would prefer it online, considering our time now. So some of you might prefer to gather data online by using Google Forms and other means, SurveyMonkey and others. So make sure that everything is ready. Then, of course, you have to provide instructions to the participants. Make sure you both have an understanding on what they are going to do. Okay, next is you administer the instrument and implement the intervention or treatment if applicable. So you administer the instrument. So if you already have identified your participants and you have come to an agreement already on what they are going to do, you can now administer the instrument. You can give them the instrument, give them time to answer the instrument, and then of course you also have to inform them when you are going to retrieve their responses. Then you could also, this is also the time that you are going to implement the intervention. Let's say you are having an experimental study. So this is the time that you are going to implement a particular intervention or treatment. Then, of course, you have to record what needs to be recorded by the time you implement the intervention or the treatment. Then, in as much as possible, you utilize triangulation. What is triangulation? So triangulation is a way of using more than one method to collect data on the same topic to assure the validity of research, which also involves different types of samples. So for example, you have gathered a lot of data already. So you use a survey questionnaire. So let's say, for example, you use a Likert scale questionnaire. And then you have gathered all the responses, but there are some parts of it that you find questionable. So you want to verify and you want to check the consistency of the responses of your respondents or your participants. So you conduct triangulation by conducting focus group discussion. So you could do that using interview as well, like one-on-one interview or focus group discussion, or you would have another survey, or you make a journal. Okay, so next. This time, I will give you a sample for data collection procedure, like how you're going to state it. This may not be new to you. I'll just show you this one. Okay.
Sharing the
Mm. Okay, this one, yeah, the first one, yeah. Mm. The word file. There, yes, that one. Okay, so this is an example of a data collection procedure that I used in my previous study. This has been presented in Hasai. Yeah. Okay, so here, data collection questionnaires were used. So you have to specify there what you used in gathering or collecting your data. So in our case, we use questionnaire. So actually, this is a researcher made questionnaire. Before I come up with the final list of indicators to be included in the questionnaire, I also did pilot testing. Okay, and then get the validity and reliability constructs of the questionnaire. Okay, so questionnaires were used to determine the learner's age, gender, first language, and academic performance. Then the test was a multiple choice. So here I described what kind of instrument I used. It was a questionnaire, a multiple choice questionnaire. And then how much does each question equivalent to, or what the equivalent point, what is its equivalent point, and so on. Okay, that is just one example for data collection. Okay, so this study actually is an example of a quantitative study. I will show you a different data collection technique which I used in my qualitative study. Okay, can we have the other example? Let's close it. Okay, yes. Let's have the other example. Yes, that one. Okay, so here, if you notice here in my data gathering, I mentioned there that the researcher conducted an open-ended interview. Okay, so I specified there the type of method that I used. There, I used open-ended interview to the identified participants of the study. So participants' availability for a face-to-face interview was considered. Hence, the interviews were conducted online using video calls in FB Messenger or Skype or phone interviews. I guess for this time now, you could actually follow the same thing, because if it would be too hard for you to gather data face to face, then I guess you would really resort to using online platforms or online means to gather data. So here, all participants were briefed about the study. So like I said earlier, you have to orient, you have to inform your participant what you are trying to get from them. Then a consent was sought for the recording of the whole interview process. Like I said earlier, to respect their privacy and for ethical consideration, you have to ask if they are comfortable to be recorded like that. Then anonymity of the participants, however, was assured. And preliminary guide questions were sent for those participants who requested for it. Because there are participants who would want to really see what you are really trying to get from them. So what kind of responses you are expecting from them. That's why some of them would ask for the preliminary guide questions. Okay, so that's it. Now let's go back. Yes, to the slides. Okay. Okay. All right. So I think it is best to identify or see the difference between a qualitative research and a quantitative research because, of course, these two have different procedures in gathering data and different focus in how you are going to get your data and what kind of data you should be getting. Okay, first, qualitative research is subjective, while quanti is objective. Okay, that's pretty much self-explanatory. Quali research questions answer the what and the why, while quanti research questions answer how many or state relationship or differences. The literature review for a quali may be done as the study progresses, while the literature review for the quanti is usually done before the conduct of the study. Now, for quali, it develops a theory, while quanti, there is the theory already, and you are going to test that theory. Qualitative research is interpretative because you are going to interpret their responses to the whats and the whys, while for the quantitative, you are going to measure. You're going to measure how many, or you're going to measure the relationship, the strength of the relationship. You're going to measure the differences between the variables that you are testing. Okay, next is qualitative reports rich narrative, individual interpretation. So you are going to interpret the responses of your participants. Basic elements of the analysis are words and ideas, while in the quantitative report statistical analysis. So you would use frequency counts, different hypothesis testing, like for example, t-test and so on. So the basic element of the analysis in quantitative are numbers, okay? Researcher is part of the process in qualitative. Sometimes the researcher tends to becomes involved in the whole process, while in the quantitative researcher is separate from the process because remember, quantitative research is objective. Now, in qualitative, those people who responded to you or who answered or who give you answers to your queries as participants, while in quanti you call them subjects or your respondents. Okay, so take note to use the right term: participants for qualitative and respondents for quantitative. Next, qualitative is context dependent because again, you are going to look into the real responses of your participants. You're going to interpret line by line and get the whole idea of what your participant is really trying to say. For example, you might be asking their experience in module making. So you have to interpret all the everything that they say. Unlike for quantitative, that it is very objective that you might say in a scale of 1 to 5, how was your experience in module making? Then they might just say 1 as very nice or 5 as very bad, something like that. Okay, next. Qualitative reasoning is dialectic and inductive. Okay, why is it inductive? Because of course you're going to describe the meaning and discover the meaning and come up with a theory of the different contexts that they put into. While in quantitative, the reasoning is logical and deductive. There is a theory already. It's like there is a theory already, and you're going to dig deeper and look into the specifics that contribute to that theories. Okay, so you're going to establish the relationship. What could have caused this one? So you're going to find the causes for the existence of this particular topic or particular problem that you want to address. Okay, next is, okay, so descriptive and statistics are mostly used for quantitative researches. Okay, so this is used in describing a set of data. So this include frequency counts, percentage, measures of central tendency, mean, median, mode, measures of variability, range, variance, and standard deviation. Don't worry, after my session, you would be taught how to just automatically get them using your data analysis toolpack or your SPSS. So it wouldn't be too much of a hassle for you to simply count the responses one by one. You just have to key in all the responses in the toolpack, I mean, in that certain program there, and then you would just get everything. Okay, so we don't need to get to to bleed. We don't need to bleed ourselves with the hard maths ideas that are presented. Okay, next. Quantitative data analysis. Okay, so you might be using, when am I going to use frequency counts? When am I going to use percentage, mean, median? Okay, so frequency counts, this measure of the number of times that an event or observation occurs. Okay, as simple as, for example, you're going to have a study that mixed males and females. So you just have to count how many males are there, how many females are there, and then percentage. You get the total of the male and the female, and then what percent of the total are males. So let's say the total is 20, and you have 10 males and 10 females, so 10 over 20, and change it to percentage form. Next is the mean. Of course, this is very, very basic. This is the average of a given set of data, computational average. The median, this is the middlemost value when data are arranged in ascending, either ascending or descending order. This is what we call positional average. Okay, next, we also have, okay, next, mode. Okay, for the mode, this is the value that appears most often. Okay, so if you are going to find the mode, if you want to know what is the mode of my data, you just have to see whether, for example, you have a set of scores, and the most frequently appearing score there is 20. Let's say there are 10 20s, 5 10s, and um, 5 also 15. So the most appearing is 20. So that would be your mode. Next is the range. The range is the difference between the largest and the smallest values in a set of data or in a given distribution. And the variance, this is the square value of the standard deviation. So when you get a standard deviation, you just square it, and that is the variance. The standard deviation is the measure of the dispersion of the set of data from its mean. Okay, next is, okay, so what if you are asked the following questions? First, you were asked, or in your statement of the problem, in your specific questions, you have these kinds of questions. For example, number one, is there a significant difference between the first and second semester general average grade of TVL learners? Okay, so for this kind of question, do you think you are going to be using frequency counts, mean, median, mode? Next question. Is there a significant relationship between the interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligences of the senior high school learners? Now, do you think for this question it is fitting to use mean? Is it fitting to get the average of each and compare which one is bigger, which one is lesser or smaller? Okay, so there is a different take on how you are going to establish or see the difference between two variables or see the relationship between two variables. Now, this time, this is now what we call as inferential statistics. You will be using inferential statistics. So in inferential statistics, there is what we call null hypothesis. This is the denial of the existence of significant difference, effect, or relationship. So let's just go back to the question. Okay, so going back to the question, is there a significant difference between the first and the second semester general average grade of TVL learners? So your null hypothesis would state denial of the existing difference. So you would say there is no significant difference between the first and second semester general average grade of TVL learners. Okay, so, and of course, the opposite of the null hypothesis is what we call alternative hypothesis, which affirms the significant difference or relationship. So if the null hypothesis denies the significant difference or relationship, the alternative will affirm the significant difference or the relationship. So for example, a number two, you would say there is a significant relationship between the intrapersonal intelligences of the senior high school learners. Okay, so I think you don't have question on that, so let's proceed. Okay, so let's proceed. Okay. So these are the different inferential statistical techniques. So I will just be presenting to you the most common ones. Okay, so first is we have t-test of independent samples. Okay, like I said earlier, don't worry, you will be taught how to get, how to use t-test of independent samples later. And also t-test of dependent samples. Now, what is t-test of independent samples? T-test of independent samples, it determines whether the means of two independent groups differ significantly. So you have two independent groups. Now, let's say, for example, you want to check the NAT performance of cluster 1 and cluster 2. So cluster 1 and cluster 2 are two independent groups, and you are going to compare whether cluster 1 performs better than cluster 2. Next, t-test of dependent samples. So it determines whether the means of the two dependent groups differ significantly. Okay, so you have the same, the same group, and you want to check, for example, if they differ or there is a significant difference in the means of their performance. Okay. Okay, next is Pearson R. So for Pearson R, it measures the strengths and direction of the linear relationship of the two variables. If you remember our the second question that I presented you earlier, it asked about, is there a significant relationship? So for that kind of question, you are going to be using Pearson R. So it measures the strengths and direction of the linear relationship of the two variables. Let's say you may want to check if there is a significant relationship between the student's performance in their number of hours sleeping. You want to know if those who sleep early performs better than those who sleep late, for example. Next, Spearman rule. It measures relationship between ordinal variables. Okay, so I believe you have had an idea already among the between the differences on the differences among ordinal the different types of variables. We have ordinal, nominal, and scale ratio data. Okay, so in SPSS we have scale variables, we have the ratio variables, we have ordinal variables, we have nominal variables. So I believe you already have an idea on those kinds of variables. So there had been a session on that previously. And also it will be rediscussed after my session. Okay, because it is very important that you could classify your variable or your data correctly, because you wouldn't get the correct answer if you classified it wrongly. Okay, next. In case you would be using the p-value, but do not dig deeper into how you are going to get p-value manually, because you are not going to do that. So by the time you would use data analysis toolpack and or the SPSS, it would directly generate the p-value. In case you would be using the p-value, these are the important things that you should bear in mind. These are important guides on how you are going to interpret. Give me Okay, so sorry for that. If you've been talking for very straight minutes, your vocal cords would surrender. Okay. Anyway, thank you for your understanding. Okay, going back, using the p-value. Okay, like I said earlier, these are some of the important points that you should remember if you are going to be utilizing p-value. The first, if the p-value is less than or equal to the level of significance, let's say you set your level of significance to 0.05. If the p-value is less than or equal to that 0.05, then you reject the null hypothesis. Okay, let's say, for example, upon computation, the p-value is 0.03. Comparing 0.03 and 0.05, the computed p-value is less than the level of significance. Therefore, you would say you reject the null hypothesis and come up with a conclusion that there is a significant difference or relationship between the variables. Now, what if the computed p-value is greater? Let's say the computed p-value is 0.05. 0.1. Comparing 0.1 and 0.05, you could say that 0.1 or 0.10 is greater than your level of significance, which is 0.05. Therefore, you fail to reject the null hypothesis, meaning to say that the difference or the relationship between the two variables that you are studying is not significant. So you would say there is no significant difference or relationship between sleep and performance, like that. Okay? So I think that is a bit clearer now. Let's proceed. Okay, we are done with quantitative. Okay, we are now going to talk about qualitative data analysis technique. Like I said earlier, for qualitative data analysis, you play around with words. Quanti, you play around with numbers. This time, words and ideas. You interpret, you analyze words and ideas. Okay, qualitative data analysis technique first is narrative analysis. Actually, there are a lot, but I will be presenting to you the most common ones. And also, later, after quantitative data analysis, using the data analysis tool pack and SPSS, qualitative data analysis will be, there would be a separate discussion. Okay, more thorough discussion. First, a narrative analysis aims to identify the kinds of stories told about a research phenomenon. Okay, of course, when you're going to conduct qualitative data, you have to have in mind that there is a certain phenomenon that you want to understand. You want to discover, you want to explain the existence of that particular phenomenon. This is a way to describe the structure of stories through analysis of particular narrative segments. Okay, so this is concerned with actions. Examine the activities that are performed when people talk with one another and how these stories make use of a cultural context and other practices. Next. Next is what we call as discourse analysis. This is concerned with language, so much more of analyzing language. Okay, so this is concerned with language use beyond the boundaries of a sentence, utterance concerning relationships between language and society. Why do they speak this way? And why is it their manner of speaking? So it has a very linguistic outlook, which prevents incorporating linguistic and non-linguistic dimension. Talk is a social action, therefore we analyze their talk, but not the person. So if you're going to do discourse analysis, make sure you would be able to separate the person from their talk itself, because it is their talk that you will be analyzing and not the person. Now, this seeks to expose connection between language, power, inequality, and ideology and how they manifest. Okay, so it explores relationship between discourse and reality in a particular context. Okay, discourse is socially constitutive as well as socially conditioned. Okay, next technique is content analysis. This is also called thematic analysis. So upon analyzing the textual information systematically, you are going to create different themes. Okay, so you're going to generate a general idea out of the raw responses of your participants. So let's say, for example, participant A have this answer to your question, really lengthy. So you have to interpret everything that he said in that particular response. And then you are going to group the responses that have the same the same meaning. So you create themes. So for your participants, let's say for example, you have 15 participants, so you might be able to create different themes out from their responses. Okay. Next, you expose meaning, motives, opinions, and purposes embedded within the text. So again, you always have to play around with the words or the ideas that transpired during your interview. For example, if you use interview in data collection. Next, establishes categories, inductive or deductive, to examine the material. It can actually involve counting, okay, but not to the point that you are going to use inferential statistics, okay? Okay, next is categories have to be sufficiently precise to enable different coders to arrive to a similar result with the same body of material. Okay, so let me just go back to the first, to one of the suggestions earlier on how you are going to collect data before actually collecting data, which is to really train your co-raters or your co-observers, because, or your co-interpreter. Okay, because if you don't have the same, if you haven't come up with a unified idea in mind what you are really going to look into this particular study, then you would really arrive at coding the responses differently. Okay, so which might be also very difficult for you by the time you are going to get into the real discussion or interpretation and result of your study. Okay. Okay, so I think that's it actually. I hit the time, 1 hour. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I guess I could give you few minutes to speak if you have some questions. Feel free to send a message if you have some questions before I would be turning you over to the next topic. Mhm. So no questions so far? Okay, so I guess no question. Anyway, if you have some clarifications, you are grouped into clusters. You have your own moderators there, so you could actually ask your moderator per cluster if you have some clarifications and questions. Also, please update about what you are into already. So please also give updates to your moderators as to where you are at already, so that we could also give you the right help if you actually need it. Okay, so I guess that would be it. So let me end my presentation by saying that success is not final, failure is not fatal. So if you fail in your journey to research, that's not gonna kill you. And it is the courage to continue that counts. So never give up. Okay, adja to us all. Be safe, everyone. Thank you. And once again, good morning. So I guess we will be giving you 5 minutes break before we proceed to the next topic. Thank you all. Good morning.